Yes, Mr. Gwede, you may proceed.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Mantashe, you had finished the commission with a written statement, is that correct? May I refer you to...
Oh, there is a button to press there, is it not working? Or maybe somebody is sabotaging you. The technicians will try and somebody is going to come and see if they can assist. Oh.
Let me check this one. No, there's this one.
Oh, and it was there before lunch because he made his opening statement from there. Yeah. Actually, while the technician is looking at that, I've just remembered something which I should have mentioned earlier on. I became aware late or early evening yesterday that some equipment belonging to the SABC had been removed or stolen from this venue yesterday. I think this is completely unacceptable. The media should be able to find their equipment here if they leave their equipment here. But the Secretary of the Commission is here and is listening to me. He should take whatever steps are necessary to make sure that there will be no repeat of this. The media is very important in conveying to the public what's going on here at the Commission, and we can't have their equipment stolen from this venue. So the Secretary of the Commission will look into that. I know he had already been attending to it, but he must just make sure that going forward, we are not going to have a repeat of that. If it means that there should be somebody who remains here when it's the lunch break to make sure that everything that was left here is here, that must be done. Thank you.
Mr. Mantashe, I suspect that your answer could not have been recorded. I posed a question to you whether you had finished a written statement to the Commission, and your answer?
My answer is yes.
Yes. May I now refer you to one of the bundles that is before you, that's Exhibit H6.
Yes, I have it.
Yes. You'll see that on the first page, if you go to the first page of that exhibit, it will be an index. And if you turn over the page, you will see that there's a document styled on the first, on the second, on the, if you turn over from the index.
Yes.
There'll be page 1 on top.
Yes.
Yes, there's a document there styled the submission made by the African National Congress to the Judicial Commission of Inquiry to inquire into allegations of state capture, corruption, and fraud in the public sector, including organs of a state. Now, could you please turn to page 14, 14? There is a signature there. Is that your signature?
Yes, that is my signature.
And this document, is this the statement that you have submitted before the Commission?
Yes, this is the statement we submitted.
Do you confirm same under oath?
Yes, I do confirm it under oath.
Yes. Now,
I guess you intend or you mean he's confirming the contents thereof as correct?
Yes.
Thank you.
Now, before we deal with the contents of the statement, can you share with us very briefly your history within the ANC?
I've been involved in the ANC for a long time, first as an activist. I ended up in the trade union movement. I have been active in the alliance broadly, but in the ANC as a leader, I was elected Secretary General in 2007, and I remained as such until 2017. In 2017, I was elected Chairperson of the ANC.
Yes. Now, the statement that has been admitted as evidence. What was the purpose of this statement?
If you go to point 1 of that statement, it summarizes the purpose. There are 3 points that are listed there, and let me go through them. 1 is to clarify the confusion that has arisen when the banking institution presented their evidence about their meeting with the ANC and their meetings with the IMC together, though these are not same institution. The one is the ANC. As a person who was not in government at the time, I had nothing to do with the IMC, so I can't give evidence on the meetings with the IMC. So we're clarifying in the main the meetings with the ANC. The second one is to respond specifically to the evidence tendered by the banking institution with reference to their meetings with the ANC at Luthuli House, where 3 of the banks did meet us individually. We met ABSA, we met Standard Bank, we met Nedbank, we didn't meet FNB. And finally, is to explain why the ANC met the bank and what internal processes were followed thereafter. In that section, the purpose is to explain that we didn't just wake up and call to the banks. There were quite a number of issues that put pressure on us to actually seek clarity on how the banks were working.
Okay. And you confirm that you were part of the delegation that met with the banks?
I led all the delegations that met with the banks.
Who were the other members of the delegation?
In the delegation, we had Jesse Duarte, who is the Deputy Secretary General of the ANC, and we had Enoch Godongwane, who is the Chairperson of the Economic Transformation Committee of the ANC. And of course, we're supported by Krish Naidu as a legal person in the ANC.
Yes. You commence your statement by dealing with the responses of the banks. Can I suggest that we do not follow that sequence and we rather start on page 5, paragraph 2, as it set out a proper chronology leading to the circumstances upon which the meetings between the banks were leading to the meetings with the banks. And if you can sketch for us those circumstances, please.
The issue of the closure of the bank accounts of Oak Bay in particular was a topical matter which was in the public domain. There was a lively public discussion on it, and there were quite a number of pressure points on the ANC. The first one is that Oak Bay itself came to the ANC mainly emphasizing the possibility of the loss of jobs. That's what appealed to us. The other issues were not a major pressure point. Secondly, many of the black business, particularly BBC, did put pressure on us to say this is a precedent that is actually dangerous to black business. But if you look into this, you will see that there were quite a number of structural meetings of the ANC that took formal decision on how to deal with the matter.
And how many meetings did you held with Oak Bay?
Come again?
How many meetings? Was it only one meeting, or did you have
No, we had a
more than
meeting
one?
with Oak Bay. We had two. There were two meetings of Oak Bay. First of all, because they wanted to convince us on their case, where they even look into their structure as a company, how difficult it is for them to get licenses when they've applied. Then they came to this issue of all the banks having refused to do business with them, and therefore impossible to have a transactional bank that would process their payments, including payments of salaries.
Yes. And in the second meeting?
That is, the second meeting was more emphasizing on the closure of accounts. The first one was more outlining what is the structure of the company, how it works.
What intervention did they seek, from the ANC?
Actually, many of the organizations they lobbied was to put pressure on the banks to reopen their accounts. And they actually thought that we'll join that campaign as the ANC.
That is Oak Bay.
That is Oak Bay.
Okay.
And how did the ANC deal with this request, which was made by Oak Bay?
The ANC dealt with it in a very simple way. One, we met Oak Bay. Number two, we did get a report from internal, particularly that government was dealing with the same matter. We took a decision that, listen, we can't deal with this issue from one angle. We need to get the views of the banks. How do they operate? What leads to the closure of an account? And when we got that information, only then could we take a decision.
Now, if you can turn to page 7 of the statement.
Mr. Mkwena, are you moving away from the second meeting?
No.
Not yet.
No, not
Okay.
yet. Now, if you look at on page 7, you outline that you say that the officials also provided a framework of principles for the engagement with the banks in the following terms.
Yes.
Was this subsequent to the two meetings with Oak Bay?
Let me preamble that with how the ANC works. If you are Secretary General, you are full-time in the ANC. People come to you, they meet you. The DSG is full-time in the ANC. We meet them. But the modus operandi of the ANC is that you can't do things as you wish. You revert back to the structures of the organization. You go to the officials, look, Oak Bay was here, Oak Bay raised these issues, how do we handle? Then you are provided with guidance on how to deal with the matter. So this is what officials, when we talk of officials, we talk of the 6 elected office bearers of the ANC. They got together and provided this guidance on how to handle this matter.
Now, the second meeting with Oak Bay, how did it conclude?
You see, if you go to those meetings, you will see that one of the meetings, Oak Bay wanted to meet officials. One was with the secretariat, and the other one was with the officials. And when you meet the officials, you get 6 officials of the ANC listening to the case. Then those officials give directives to the secretariat. This is how you should handle this matter.
Yes, but specifically in relation to that meeting, what did the ANC make any promises to Oak Bay? Was there any resolution that was taken at that meeting between Oak Bay and the ANC as to how to deal with the issues relating to the banks?
No, decisions are not taken on our hoof. We listen, we get the information, we don't respond on the spot. That's why you'll see the point you are pointing us at point 7 is then after having heard them, then you are given the guidelines on how to deal with the matter.
Yes. Mr. Chair, I want to move to the guidelines unless there's something on the second meeting which the Chair might still need to clarify.
Yeah, no, I wondered whether you were intending to ask any questions about the first meeting or whether there isn't much that you want.
There was no much, but the witness did testify about the first meeting to say that it was addressing a number of issues, but not related specifically to the banks. Mr. Mantashe, in your first meeting, can you highlight those issues that you said Oak Bay wanted the ANC to assist with?
If you go to those circumstances, the meeting of the 8th of April, Hazam Mohowa, having requested the meeting with the ANC, was to discuss...
You are looking at what page?
Page 5, Mr.
Page
Chair.
5.
Page 5, paragraph 2.
Page 5, sir. If you go there, you see, they wanted to discuss potential losses of jobs. In his written request to meet, Hazamo also stated that the number of banks had caused to work with the company, have ceased to work with the company to the extent that it had become virtually impossible to continue conducting business in South Africa. So those are the two main points that were discussed with Oak Bay.
Yes.
There's a reference to them discussing with you or raising the issue of how difficult it was for them to obtain, I think, mining licenses, if I'm not mistaken.
That goes further.
Is that in the same meeting or another meeting?
In another meeting.
That would be the second meeting with them?
Yes.
Okay. Do you want to, what was the main purpose of that meeting? Was it to discuss that or mining licenses, their difficulties?
No. You see, the question of mining licenses came as a by the way. It came as a by the way, as an additional issue. The main issue was that, listen, we don't have access to banking facilities, we're about to close, and anyway, in addition to that, we're having a problem in getting licenses when we apply.
Mr. Mantashe, if I may refer you to page 15, in order to assist the chair in following your evidence. Are you there?
I am there.
Is this
Page 15.
Yes, 15. I'm just trying to get there. So page 19, Mr. Chair. 19. Would that be the letter that you received from Oak Bay, which led to the first meeting?
Yes, this is the letter.
And what you were testifying about and telling the chair about the potential loss of work, it's also recorded in that letter. Am I correct?
Yes, it is.
Maybe to assist the chair and for us to place your evidence into proper context, maybe it's better for you to read it into the record.
No, in the letter that was written by her.
If you can read it, this one.
I read the whole letter. The letter is, Dear SJ, raise 7,500 potential job losses at Oak Bay Investment and our portfolio companies. Now, I wanted to request some time from you for Mr. Muhsin Williams and myself to address the national officials on Monday to share with you our huge concern that Oak Bay Investments and our portfolio companies may soon be incurring significant job losses. Following the unexplained decision of a number of banks and of our auditors to cease working with us, and of continued press coverage of unsubstantiated allegations against the Gupta family, it has become virtually impossible to continue to do business in South Africa. We believe that this is the result of an anti-competitive, politically motivated campaign designed to marginalize our business. We have received no justification whatsoever to explain why ABSA, FNB, SASFIN, Standard Bank, and now Nedbank have decided to close our business account. KPMG themselves said there was no audit reason to end their work with us. Oak Bay has a 23-year track record of strong business performance and turnaround skills in a number of sectors. Our ability to be a disruptor in new sector, challenging the dominant business and global players in South Africa, is the source of our success. Between 2012 and 2015, 47,000 jobs have been lost in South Africa's mining sector. In fact, since 2015, the top 3 mining companies in South Africa have made more than 10,000 people redundant. In contrast, we have created 3,500 jobs in mining. Our acquisition of Optimum from Glencore also prevented liquidation that would have seen more than 3,000 South African mining jobs lost. All these jobs are now at risk. With our bank accounts closed, we are currently unable to pay many of the salaries of our more than 4,500 employees. We find it totally unacceptable that tens of thousands of their dependents would have to suffer as a result of the campaign against Oak Bay and the Gupta family. Therefore, the Gupta family have come to the conclusion that it is time to relinquish control of Oak Bay investment and have stepped down from all executive and non-executive positions and any involvement in the day-to-day running of the business. By doing so, they hope to end the political campaign against Oak Bay. As the CEO, I now hope to draw a line under the corporate bullying and anti-competitive practice we have faced from the banks. The livelihoods of too many people are at risk should our bank accounts remain closed. I hope that you appreciate my candor and can see that we are doing everything we can to save thousands of South African jobs. We would like some time with the leadership of the ruling party to seek advice and assistance to avoid this eventuality. If you have any question, please do not hesitate to contact me. Nazim Hoa.
Yes, and after receiving this letter, there was then the first meeting which you've already testified about.
Yes.
And then thereafter, there was the second meeting which we're still busy with. And on page 6,
Yes.
the last paragraph, you then say, after the second meeting, the officials deliberated over the issues and directed the Secretary General to meet with the 4 major banks and some of the relevant ministers. Mr. Enoch Gorongwani was mandated to arrange the meetings with the banks. Pursuant to the decision by Cabinet to set up an inter-ministerial task team, it became unnecessary for the Secretary General to meet with the ministers. Now, we were at the point where we are now dealing with the framework principles, which we are going to serve as the guidelines for the officials to meet with the banks. You can take us now through those guidelines or the framework principles.
The officials gave the Secretary General and the delegation that would meet the banks these guidelines. 1, the ANC must be mindful that banks are not permitted to share information about their clients with a third party, as much as the engagement with the banks should be about principles and general facts. So in other words, the first point is that when we meet the banks, we cannot debate a relationship of the bank and a client. We should deal with the general principles. That is guideline one. Number two, how consistent is the principle of account closure applied? And how widespread is the practice of account closure in the banking sector? Is it something that can be seen to be political? Is it a normal practice in the banks? Is it widespread? And the fourth one is the internal debate of corporate capture in the ANC having any impact on the bank's decision-making process in relation to closure of accounts? You must remember that at that time, before we came to the stage of state capture, the debate in the ANC was raging on. We started with a concept called corporate capture, which was referring to individual companies capturing individual influential political leaders. It is a graduation of that debate that made us to coin the term state capture. And actually we took it further than that and said if we don't stop it, we will end up with a mafia state. This is therefore, the question here is whether that debate within the ANC itself is influencing the banks to take that decision. And within that framework, the mandate to the Secretary General was extended to seek clarity on the perception emanating from certain quarters within the ANC. One, that banks are using their ability to terminate banking relationship to exercise power of white monopoly capital. You will see that we put that in inverted commas, against black business to a degree that should concern policymakers, and the four large banks are colluding and acting in concert in withdrawing banking services from a common customer. So that framework guided the delegation that I led that met the banks.
Now, you recall that I referred you to page 19, Annexure A, that was the letter of Oak Bay. You don't have to go there. If Oak Bay's concern was that it is unable to operate because the banks has actually closed the accounts, how were these guidelines going to achieve or going to assist Oak Bay in any manner?
If you go further in our submission, you'll see that one of the conclusions we came to was that the issue of jobs is very important, but we put a qualifier there as you go further that says, yes, it is a bad issue, but people must comply with the law and regulations of the country. And the reason we came to that, it is the influence of the meeting we had with the banks, because the banks gave us a number of issues, which I'm not going to get into now. But we came to that, listen, we cannot just talk about jobs. We must also emphasize the importance of complying with the regulations and the rules.
So you now have the guidelines, you have the mandate from the officials.
Yes.
And I take it that the meetings with the banks were arranged. On page 8, you are dealing with the meetings that were held with ABSA, Standard Bank, and Nedbank, and you summarize what emanated from those meetings. If you may please go to page 8 and deal with the paragraph starting by, in their response, the banks tabled the following issues.
The first thing that the banks...
I'm sorry, Mr. Mantashe.
Yes.
Before you do so, going back to what you told us, Oak Bay wanted, I think if I understood you correctly, you said it seemed that from their point of view, they may have wanted more than what ultimately you were prepared to do. You were going to seek clarification, but understood you to be saying they seemed to want your intervention to assist them. Did I misunderstand that?
No, the reality of the matter is that Old Bay, in all their campaign, they wanted every institution, including the ANC, to put pressure on the banks to open their accounts.
Yes, okay.
Yes.
Now, at the meeting where they said that, did you respond to say, we can't do that, or was that to be indicated later on?
No. What we did was to listen. After they have left, we discussed the meeting with them, and then we're given that guidance by the officials. Using that guidance, then we're now meeting the banks.
Okay.
Now, having met the banks, they are giving us this framework.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, we have now dealt with the framework. You are arranging the meetings with the banks, and the banks responded to the ANC. You are dealing with that from page 8?
Yes.
And what was the response of the banks?
Let me read let me go through the 12 points that all the banks raised as guiding them.
That's fine.
Okay. The first one was that banks are expected to comply with 210 pieces of legislation in their everyday functioning, and this includes legislation that governs their obligation in relation to money laundering, corruption. In general, banks experience a measure of difficulty coping with this compliance. And what they were outlining is that, listen, we are the banks, there are 210 pieces of legislation that govern us. We are expected to comply with all 210 of them. And they summarize them.
Was your understanding that the 210 was nothing more than simply saying there are many regulations we have to comply with, or was it a specific number that was meant to say that's the actual number of the legislation?
Our understanding at the time was that that was the actual number, because we think that having invited the banks did their homework and actually gave us the exact number of pieces of legislation they had to comply with.
Thank you.
And the second one was that South African banks have helped South Africa to be rated in the top 10 in the world when it comes to banking. If you go to the World Economic Forum rankings, when it comes to the item banking, South Africa is consistently in the top 10. So they were explaining to us that because they are complaining with this piece of legislation, many as they may look, bad as they may sound, but they have helped South Africa to be ranked in the top 10 when it comes. An enhanced due diligence is conducted, and this includes family members of political exposed persons. Now, if you are a political exposed person, there is a specific, more enhanced due diligence on your finances, and that is not limited to you, it is extended to your family. And I can tell you, if you can call us, we are the political exposed people. If you ask us, I can tell you, we can give you stories about that extension to families and family members. It's a reality. It's not just a point that was made by the banks. Banks can only discuss details of their dealing with client and a secondary banker. In this case, because one of the issues that was raised is that we don't have a transactional banker. Transactional banker is the banker who does your daily transactions. You can have a secondary banker, you can invest, you can do other things, but there's a transactional banker. And they explained to us, and we understood it very well after that, that there's this distinction between banks. So not all 4 banks that we met, not all 3 were actual transactional bankers of a client. Only one was, others were secondary bankers. On number 9 is that the banks take into consideration the resignation of auditors, sponsors to the Johannesburg Stock Exchange as part of risk profile analysis. That talks to the point of the auditors. KPMG has withdrawn their service, and when that happens for banks, that is a red signal already. And on the termination without notice can happen if the bank suspects that the account is being used illegally and negligently, or the client has dealings with a listed person. And on any transaction conducted in US dollars, the United States has jurisdiction. One of the banks actually even gave us a practical example of what happened to their branch in another country, outside of the country, where transactions were in US dollars, and as a result of that, they had to actually deal with the demands of the United States because transactions were in dollars. That is the emphasis that is put there. Banks follow the activities and analyze media reports whenever allegations are made that a cabinet post has been offered in exchange for a favors, or allegation that a minister facilitated the sale of a mine in improper circumstances. They were not referring to this client, but many of the things they were referring to here, we understood them. Just listen, we read there, people are called to offer posts for a favor. For a bank, they follow that in the media. For them, that is a red signal. Minister X has facilitated a transaction for a mine improperly. For the banks, that is a red signal. So at the end of that, we understood the basis of banks closing accounts. And that was the essence of our meeting.
Now, during this meeting, the banks was offering this explanation to the ANC delegation. Did the ANC delegation at least put the letter from Oak Bay, to the banks to say that, well, there are other issues which are raised by Oak Bay, and one of them being the potential loss of employment of 7.5 employees, and that Oak Bay wanted us to communicate with you about their banking accounts, which were closed at the time.
If you read the letter from the Group Chief Executive Officer of Standard Bank, Sim Chabalala, who is an annexer to this report, it summarizes succinctly the issues that we discussed with them. And that summary covers all the banks.
So that letter was never put to the banks?
No, the issue of potential job losses are covered in that letter. So we raised that issue, that this is the risk involved in closing these banks. But the issue was that we didn't want to discuss that with the banks. We wanted to understand what is the basis of closing these accounts from the banks.
Mr. Chair, the letter which Mr. Mantashe is referring to, may I refer to page 15? Is that the letter that you are saying it summarized accurately what transpired between the banks and the ANC at the time?
Yes.
And Mr. Mkwena, does it cover the issue you were asking him, or does it not say anything about it?
Yes, Mr. Chair, it does cover those issues. That was conversing with the witness, and he's saying that for context, all the issues that were discussed between the banks and the ANC are neatly summarized in that letter.
Well, you asked him whether at that meeting with the banks, they did, as the ANC put before the banks, the letter from, was it Oak Bay? That's what you were saying?
Yes.
Yeah. And he responded by saying what they discussed is covered in Mr. Shabalala's letter. So I still want to know whether what you were seeking is dealt with in the letter, or is the position that it is not dealt with in the letter because it was not discussed?
Meaning that those issues that were raised with by Oak Bay were the subject matter of the meeting between the banks, and it was then summarized in this letter.
Okay.
Page
Mr. Mantashe,
15,
can
yes.
I just ask you?
No, what we couldn't do,
Yeah.
because we thought it would be unethical to take Ogbay letter, give it to the banks.
Yes.
We couldn't do that. We would raise the issues regarding the potential loss of jobs and many other issues, because in engaging the banks, we're very alive to the reality that we couldn't discuss Ogbay accounts with the banks.
Yes. Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Now, Mr. Mantashe, on page 9, you move to deal with the meeting of the NWC, which was held on the 23rd of May, 2016, and the observation flowing from that meeting. Can you please take the chair through those observations in the meeting?
Now, I think, first of all, let me outline these structures. You see, the officials are the top 6 officials that are elected with specific titles. Then there is a National Working Committee, which is a structure that actually executes decision of the National Executive Committee. It is a quarter of the NSC. In this case, 20 directly elected members are serving in the NWC. It processes all documents that go to the NSA. So when the officials have done work, they go and account to the National Working Committee. This National Working Committee meeting of the 23rd May is where the officials went to account that we met the banks. And therefore, having given the report, then the NWC made observations. There are 5 of these observations. One is that the coordinated action by the banks smacks collusion, and government and regulator should confront that as an issue within the rules. In other words, the NWC say, okay, you have met the banks, you have got the information, but it is now up to the government and regulator to deal with what looks like collusion. Secondly, the power of banks to close businesses without being required to explain their action poses a threat in that these powers could be abused for various reasons, including possible resistance to a transformation. And that explains the question of the importance of empowering black South Africans in business. And they say this can be used to block the transformation program. Thirdly, the potential loss of jobs must be raised sharply without the ANC being seen to be a spokesperson of any particular company. But the question of any action that leads to job losses must be raised sharply by the ANC. The fourth one is that the government must ensure that there is a broad understanding of the pieces of legislation at government level, because the sense we had was that these 210 pieces of legislation, not everybody, very few people had a sense and understanding of these 210 pieces of legislation that banks should comply with. And therefore, the issue raised is that we must raise the understanding and the awareness. And it will serve a good purpose if leaders and public representatives of the ANC are made to understand the concept of politically exposed persons and moral stigma attached to the politically exposed persons, that they are inherently corrupt until proven otherwise. That is the interpretation of the NWC, that when you are a politically exposed person, you don't need to be proven innocent. You are assumed to be in transgression. Instead, you should prove yourself that you are not transgressing. And that's how it is interpreted. And the fifth one is that the ANC must always be sensitive to public perceptions and appreciate the need to reassure society that its interventions are genuine. Those were the 3 points that were raised by the NWC.
Yes. Now, these points that were raised by the NWC, were they ever conveyed to the banks? Was there any further engagement with the banks now that we have the understanding of the NWC?
No, there could not be any further engagement with the banks because the banks gave us the clarity we needed. So there was no necessity for us to go back to them, because if we did that, the fact that is the narrative that we're putting pressure on the banks would actually be real. So we didn't go back to the banks. They have given us the explanation. We're happy with the explanation. And it was up to us to use that information and knowledge to deal with the reality that we're confronted with.
You are also dealing with the National Executive Committee meeting,
Yes.
which was held on the 28th, between the 28th to the 30th of May, 2016. Could you please share with us what was deliberated in that meeting?
As I said, the NWC processes issues. Officials do certain work, NWC do certain work, but ultimately the work process through the NWC end up in the National Executive Committee, which is the highest decision-making structure of the ANC. Therefore, having dealt with this issue, we have an obligation to take that report to the National Executive Committee. This is the NEC that received that report.
And what did you do with that report?
That meeting of the NEC did adopt the report of the NWC and resolved that decision of the ANC to meet the bank was driven by the following concerns. That is the NEC now. Mainly loss of jobs. That is what drove that. The perception that the bankers were colluding and the perception that banks were exercising power of white monopoly capital against black business. And therefore that is the observation of the NEC that is the basis of engagement between the ANC and the banks.
Now, there were important issues which were dealt with by the NEC in the meeting of the 28th to 30 May 2016. And I want you to please take us through them. They are contained from page 11. If you go to paragraph 8, it appears that those are the issues pertinent to some of the terms of reference which are currently being addressed by the Commission. Can you please take us through what was discussed there?
You see, the ANC was preoccupied with the challenges of state capture. Anybody can say anything. The main organization that dealt with this issue directly, because it had to confront it, was the fact that state capture was a reality that we were engaging with, discussing. In this meeting, we received the report of the Oak Bay and the banks, then went further and actually dealt with the allegations that the Gupta family influenced decision of the state and of the ANC. That issue became a main issue. And that's why, following the decision of the ANC, we had to report on the meeting we had with 8 members of the ANC in 2 groups and one, total 8, who reported to the SJ, who was mandated by the NEC to listen to many of them. And we listened to these people, and at the end of the day, all of them, except for one, said, we don't think it is appropriate for us to deal with this issue in the ANC. We're going to be compromised, we're going to be ridiculed, it will be a career limiting and many issues. It is on the basis of that submission that went to the NEC and said, listen, let's accept the proposal of these affected people going to independent institutions. And we took that decision, said they must go to the independent institutions, because anything we do about ourselves is going to look suspicious. Let's allow them to go to independent institutions.
But are you able to share with us in much more details? I mean, if you look at the first paragraph of the first unnumbered paragraph of paragraph 8, it says that the NEC is at its meeting held between 28 and 30 May 2016 also dealt with the allegations that the Gupta family influenced decisions in the state and in the ANC. Are you able to share with us those specifics?
The reason that we're referring to these 8 comrades, many of them have come to this commission. Actually, many of them, because of that decision to go to independent institution, have gone to the public protector. Many of them went to the commission that was set up by the SABC. And out of their information that we had, we were convinced that many of our people were feeling that the Gupta family was influencing decisions in the state and in the ANC. And the overlap between the state and the ANC is that if you are a member of the NEC and you are a minister, you get affected by this practice. ANC cannot be totally exonerated. You are an ANC leader, you get subjected to this issue. And many of them were members of the ANC.
Mr. Mantashe, were you part of that meeting?
Come again?
Were you part of that meeting?
Yes.
What was said about those allegations? What were the specifics around these allegations that the Gupta family influenced decisions in the state? That's number one. Number two, in the ANC.
Okay. Let me put it this way. The National Executive didn't deal with this issue as an inquiry. We gave report that we've had, Mr. Jonas has come, 3 top managers of the state security have come, and they have refused to give us written submissions because they were suspicious of this. And we gave that report in detail to the NEC. And it is on that basis that in the issues listed in page 12, that are 4, it summarizes a more involved debate of the report. For example, the publicly known allegation about members of the Gupta family summoning people to their private residence to offer them cabinet position in return for working with them to secure business opportunities. Those were issues we were reporting to the NEC in detail. Or the former Director General spoke of to the ANC about the authority of the family had over Directors General when they issued instruction directly to this individual, and they family were of the view that the failure to comply could be career limiting. And I would imagine that one of those Directors General have been to this commission, and they were saying, listen, we're reporting now. These people were not in the NEC. We are reporting to the NEC that having sat with these people, these are the issues that are coming through. And the other area of concern was that the playing field was not level in competing for business opportunity as a consequence of Black Economic Empowerment Program was being undermined. It would be people who have come and said, listen, in contracts, if you are not working with the Guptas, you get elbowed out. Now, we are giving this report to the NEC, and the state-owned entities were also being corroded systematically. They mentioned them, Transnet, Eskom, Safcol, SAA, Alexcor. And if you look into those are actually state entities that are a subject of discussion up to today. So all we did here, and therefore the NEC noted, it didn't just note, it noted and accepted that these 8 comrades should make their submissions in an independent body. And we accepted that. That was the beginning of the process of discussing ANC supporting the formation of this commission.
Are you able to share with the chair the 8 names of the comrades that are referred to?
Maybe before you do that, I think I have in mind what you were looking for from Mr. Mantashe in relation to the first paragraph under 8, but the two of you may have been talking slightly at cross purposes. Page 11, you have got there at 8 NEC meeting, and then you have got the first paragraph after that. He asked you, I think, about 2, maybe 3 times about that paragraph. I seemed to understand you to focus on what is at page 12, but I understand what connection you were trying to make. But I think he wanted something, he was asking something slightly different, and that's what I was also interested in. In that paragraph, the first one under 8, part of it it says the NEC at its meeting held between 28 and 30 May 2016 also dealt with the allegation that the Gupta family influenced decisions in the state and in the ANC. Dealt with. That gives the impression, to me at least, that it deliberated and may or may not have taken a decision. But I don't know whether that is what happened. That's what I would like to hear.
No, the reason I'm linking that first paragraph to page 12 is because page 12 summarizes almost the content of the discussions.
Yes.
And the decision taken is that we are accepting the suggestion by this committee that an independent body will be more competent to deal with this allegation than the ANC itself. Because if the ANC deals with these issues itself, it is going to be easy to accuse it of covering up. And therefore, following what is in first paragraph of 8, a decision is taken that these comrades actually are correct in saying to us, let's take this thing to independent body. And we thought that that was a correct issue because when we deal with some of these issues, sometimes there's an assumption that the ANC can be a court, it can be police, it can be prosecutors, it can be everything. And half the time, we don't have that capacity. We have a capacity to take action that is limited to organizational matters. Ideally, state institutions should take over on the issues. And the reason that we refer this to independent body is that when it comes out of a formal institution, an independent body, that report is having a standing in law. And we took that decision.
So the allegation that the Gupta family was, for example, influencing decisions in the ANC, that was part of what the NEC had from the committee that was reporting as to what the 8 people had said. But in terms of substance, the NEC did not take any decision whether substantively that allegation was correct. It simply said these issues must go to an independent body. We agree with the suggestion that they should go to an independent body. That's what you are saying.
Now, let me explain the issue of the ANC. You see, the difference between the ANC and the state is that when it comes to the state, a person will come and say, I was called by the Guptas. They offered me a position of a Minister of Finance. They offered me 600 million and all that. A person can do that. That is in the state. In the ANC, it is more evasive in the sense that you are dealing at best with the suspicion that when we meet here, position taken by individual leaders reflect such leaders being proxies of business interests. Half the time, we cannot say the meeting of the officials was influenced by business interests, but we can suspect that when we meet for a big meeting of the ANC, when people put their positions, they reflect influence of business, and therefore leaders of the organization become proxies of business interests. That was the basis of the concept of corporate capture, that if a company is close to me, it sponsors my program, it supports me, then I become a proxy of that company undeclared in the ANC. Yes.
No, that's fine. Let me ask this question, but you must feel free if it would be more convenient to deal with it when you come back some other time, because the arrangement is that the ANC will be able to come back at some stage to deal with a lot of issues that it may wish to deal with that will arise from this commission. Is there any stage where, as Secretary General of the ANC during the relevant period in maybe the last 10 years or the last 5-6 years, is there any period when the ANC may have begun to have a strong view that within or among its own members, senior members, there may be a significant section that might be influenced by the Gupta family in regard to positions that must be taken by the ANC on certain issues? Or is that something that you would rather deal with more comprehensively at a later stage?
We can do that. The reason that I'm saying that is this issue of state capture has been a major issue for the ANC over a period of time. When we went to our policy conference, we submitted a document called the diagnostic report. That diagnostic report dealt with these matters. And among those issues was the influence of the Gupta family among senior leaders of the ANC. So we've been dealing with that issue. So if you go to that report and link it to our organizational report to various conferences, you'll see that we've been occupied with this issue over a period of time.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Mkwena.
What would be the date of that diagnostic report?
The diagnostic report was submitted to the policy conference in June, July 2017.
And at high level, what issues did it address around this phenomenon of state capture?
The issue of state capture is that, let me break the period into various periods.
Yeah.
I must concede here that the first 5 years of the 10 years I was Secretary General, it was just comfortable. We're doing well. We structured things well. Even deployment was done nicely. If you can look into the last 5 years.
Mr. Mantashe, just to follow your evidence, let's start with the first 5 years. From which period to which period?
First 5 years is 2017.
2007 to 2012.
2007 to 2012.
Okay. Okay.
That's the first 5 years. We did a lot of good things. I think I always boast when people ask me, what could you point? I said, the decision to break education into 2 departments was a correct decision. Results are showing access to education and all that. I can point a list of those things. We did exceptionally well in the first 5 years. And in the last 12 years, then things began to fall apart. It is when this issue of state capture began to manifest, and in manifesting, it took various phases. Towards the end of that 5 years, we were in trouble. And if you will recall, at one point when there was a cabinet reshuffle, 3 of the officials revolted. See, that was an indication that we are dealing with a complex issue, serious and difficult.
That was after was that after the dismissal of Minister Nene?
After
What you refer to as the revolt?
there were two specific reshuffles that actually caused a lot of unhappiness. The first one was the dismissal of Minister Nene. The second one was dismissal and recall of Minister Gordon from England.
Yes, okay.
I'm sure that you'll canvass those issues fully when you come back, Mr. Mantashe. Can I ask this question much more differently? I know that the chair attempted to get some information from you. I posed it 3 times, but I'm sure that this time you'll be able to share some information with us. You indicated that state capture was a reality. Am I correct? That's what you said.
Yes, it is a reality.
I mean, what does that mean, and what evidence, did the ANC at the time have, or which one can point to say that this is the reality of state capture?
No, you see, let me first declare that I've never been to government. I'm in government now. I'm 8 months in government. That's the sum total of my experience in government. Now, state capture, we dealt with it at a political level in the ANC. But you will see that in the way that minister dealt with issues, one of the responsibilities we had in the ANC head office as the secretariat was to always note when there's departure from ANC policies. When there was departure from ANC policies, then we were forced to interrogate the reason and underlying causes for that departure from ANC policies. And many major debates that will be submitted here by many individual people who were directly involved will indicate on areas of departure from ANC policy.
All right. On page 12 of your statement, you refer to the national conference of the ANC that was held during December 2017.
Yes.
Can you share with us what was resolved in that conference?
We thought that we should submit this resolution because this resolution was an outcome of a very detailed report. It is actually in details on page 13. We're noting there as conference, it's a big conference. We say corruption is a social ill that cuts across sectors of society. That is what we believe. There is a societal outcry regarding the problem of corruption in the organs of state and in society more broadly. The ANC government must rigorously root out all forms of corruption, including tender rigging, fraud, bribery, nepotism in all state institutions. Then the most important part is the resolve part, because the resolve part is a call to action. It says the ANC needs to lead the moral regeneration of society, and the program must be adequately funded to account for and accounted for. And the religious community and traditional leaders should be mobilized into a whole of society approach. Secondly, is that the ANC must mobilize communities and societies around issues of corruption, position itself in leadership role with respect to culture of exposing corruption and rewarding whistleblowers within the organization. The ANC government and leadership must implement a program to prevent irregular or fraudulent practices within the ANC and in government, including ethics, monitoring, transparency, and procurement decision, checks and balances, and oversight mechanisms, and disbarring of both public servants and public at all levels from doing business with the state, and the introduction of probity and lifestyle audits. The public service and administration portfolio should fast-track the establishment of Integrity and Ethics Management Office, and bill requires requisite capacity at all levels of government. The scope must extend to SOEs, and the reporting of corruption to law enforcement agencies must be compulsory in the public sector, and the capacity of prosecutorial division must be boosted. Government must introduce new regulation to implement the above provision for dealing with corruption in the public sector. Parliamentary oversight mechanism must pay special attention to corruption. The resolution was adopted by the conference in response, a month later, on the 23rd of January. President Zuma in cabinet appointed the Commission of Inquiry to investigate allegations of state capture, corruption and fraud in the public sector, including organs of state, and appointed Honorable Justice Raymond Zondo, Deputy Chief Justice of the Republic of South Africa, as the its chairperson.
And that's why we are here today.
It looks like you left out unanimously. There was a deliberate in that resolution.
No. That there was not voted on.
Oh, okay.
It's unanimous.
But am I? Oh, okay.
Yes.
Okay. It was not voted upon. It was accepted.
It was accepted unanimous.
Yeah. Okay. But the point I was making was that in your statement there is unanimously, but when you read, I seemed to think you skipped it.
Yes, but the reality of the matter, it was taken as a decision unanimous. There was no voting, there were no opposition to it. Okay.
Mr. Mantashe, just to place some of the facts in proper context, in the last paragraph on page 14, you say that the resolution was adopted unanimously by the National Conference. In response, a month later, on the 23rd January 2018, President Zuma in cabinet appointed a commission of inquiry. Would I be correct that he did not voluntarily appoint it? There were court applications before it was in fact appointed.
There were?
Court applications.
Yes, I see the court application, but more important to us in the ANC is that in the structures of the organization, we took the decision, not in response to court application, because of the conference resolution.
Yes, no, I'm simply placing, the correct for that subsequent to that, despite this resolution of the conference, it took some time before this commission was appointed, and it only came to be as a result of court applications.
I can't give evidence to that from the ANC point. In the ANC, we took this decision. It took longer than we wanted it. If court applications nudged us, we accept that as complementing the resolution of conference. We resolved in conference to do this, and this commission was appointed. I can tell you that unless you understand the dynamics in an organization as big as the ANC, because when you're running an organization as big as the ANC, there's a responsibility in you to actually try to pull people around a particular direction. Once you get that resolution, a major step has been taken. That is important for the ANC.
No, I understand. Let's wish away the court application. If there were no court application and Mr. Zuma being aware of this resolution, we would not be having this commission today because it was compelled through court applications.
I will not agree with that. I will not agree with that. This commission will be in place because in the ANC itself, the governing party, we have accepted that there should be this commission. I'm even more convinced that we would have this commission if he didn't appoint it. I would imagine that President Cyril Ramaphosa would have appointed it.
Yes. In your statement, you also react to the evidence that was submitted by the banks. Am I correct?
Yes.
And having carefully perused your statement, it would appear that you don't take any issue with the evidence of FNB and Nedbank. Am I correct?
Yes, we don't.
Just for completeness, that is evidenced by what you say on page 2, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
In paragraph 1.10 and 1.11, you say that the recollection of the exchange of communication between Mr. Johan Berger, a director of First Rand Bank Limited, and Mr. Gorongwani of the ANC is a true reflection of what transpired between them. So that's exactly what you are content with, yes. And you also do that in relation to Nedbank, if you have regard to paragraph 1.20 on page 5.
With Nedbank?
Page 5, Nedbank, yeah.
Yes, we have.
You say that the statement by Mr. Michael Brown, Chief Executive of the Nedbank Group, about his meeting with the ANC on the 20 April 2016 fully accords with the ANC appreciation of that meeting. What is significant and correctly so in the view of the ANC, Mr. Brown has not coached his evidence nor made any mention of the terms of reference of this commission. And that's what
we have no issue with the Nedbank.
Yes. You, however, take issue with the evidence which was delivered by ABSA and Standard Bank, and you deal first with ABSA from pages 1, paragraph 1.1, and the following paragraphs. Can you take us through what are the issues which you fundamentally object to or you don't agree in relation to ABSA?
The issue we're taking up with ABSA is that ABSA conflates the executive, national executive, as in the state, and the National Executive Committee of the ANC. And we're saying if you conflate the two, fundamentally, that is flawed. That is the point we're making there. And that's why the reference to the terms of reference of this commission and link that to the meeting with the ANC is a wrong starting point, because that executive in the terms of reference is the executive as is in cabinet, not the NEC of the ANC.
And other than that, you don't take any issue with the remaining contents of ABSA's statement?
That is the main issue that we are referring to. For example, the fact that they didn't meet in the ministerial committee for the ANC is not our issue. It's the issue of the state. The fact that the meeting between the ANC at the request of the National Executive Committee and which took place in August, that is factually correct. For the record, actually, none of the person who met ABSA at the ANC headquarters were members of the National Executive as contemplated by the terms of reference. All of us were not in government, were full-time in the ANC. And therefore, we submit that that conflation of events by Ms. Masitela was misleading and created confusion and stands to be corrected, because that is the issue we're taking an issue with.
Yes. You also take issue with the evidence of Standard Bank, and you do so with reference to page 3 from paragraph 1.2. Can you summarize for the chair the main issues of dispute?
Our view is that Mr. N. Sinton of Standard Bank wrote a submission for this commission, which was emotional and had no relationship with the meeting between Standard Bank and the ANC. The letter of the Group CEO of Standard Bank reflects the condition and circumstances under which we meet. For example, Mr. Sinton is trying to create an example of the ANC that was pressurizing them, putting them under pressure. Well, the Group CEO is talking of a cordial meeting we had, and he summarizes the issues. More disturbing to us is the way that Mr. Sinton is trying to belittle the Group CEO, his own Group CEO, and say, no, in any way, that letter was written by me, you see, and all he did was to sign. It's not done. Even if I'm a speech writer, I don't go public and announce that speech of the president was written by me. Did you like it? You don't do that. So there's something wrong with the submission to the commission on behalf of Standard Bank by Mr. Sinton if you compare it to the letter written by the Group CEO immediately after the meeting. That letter, we're comfortable with it. We think it reflected immediately after the meeting the contents of the meeting and the environment of the meeting.
So, in essence, those were the main issues in which you don't agree with Mr. Sinton's testimony before this commission.
Yes.
Now, you met, when I'm saying you, Mr. Mantashe, I'm referring, obviously, you were doing that in your capacity at that time as the secretary of the ANC. The ANC met with ABSA and Nedbank. I know that it was two different meetings, but they were held on the same day, on the 20th of April, 2016. Am I correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And you also met with Standard Bank separately on the 21st April 2016.
Yes, correct.
Now, I need to confirm with you, the facts which were publicly known at the time, and simply to give you an opportunity to react to those facts and, to contextualize my questioning pertaining to why was it necessary at the time for the ANC to meet with Oak Bay Company or the Oak Bay Group. Would I be correct that at the time when the ANC met with the banks, the ANC was aware of the publicly pronounced relationship between the ex-president and the Guptas? Would that be fair to say?
Yes, that was public knowledge at the time.
And then the second one, at the time when the ANC met with the banks, the ANC must have been aware that Duduzane, the son of the president, was having business relationship with Oak Bay. Would that be fair?
Yes.
And thirdly, that at that time, there were media reports already of the transaction involving the acquisition of the Optimum coal mines from Glencore by Tegeta to a value of 2.5 billion. Those were known facts at the time.
Yes, but that was not debated in the ANC.
No, I understand. I'm simply testing what was known at the time and what was
public knowledge.
Yes. And maybe number 4, that at the time when this meeting took place, there was also reports from the media that Tegeta was awarded a contract of 4 billion to supply coal to the Amajuba power station in Mpumalanga. Those facts were known to the ANC.
They were in the public knowledge.
Yes. And number 5, that at that time, we know from the evidence of Mr. Jonas that he said that on the 14th of March 2016, he met with Mr. Zizikodwa, and he also met with you pertaining the media statement which he wanted to release relating to the offer which was made to him by the Gupta family. And that was known to the ANC before it met with
Yes.
Ogbay.
Yes, it was.
And furthermore, we have heard from the evidence of Mr. Feki Mentor that at the time when, during that period or prior to the meeting between the ANC and the banks, there were allegations that he was offered a post or a position of public, or to become a minister of public enterprise by the Guptas. Those facts were known.
That is not a public information. We never knew that. Actually, I will doubt it if it is factual.
That one you did not know at the time?
That one, I will doubt if it is factual.
Now, there
He
were
was
also,
the chairperson of the portfolio committee.
now, there were media reports at the time.
Mr. Mkwana, I just want to make sure I understand where we are going. Understood that today we'll deal with banks, the meeting of the ANC with banks. I know that to a limited extent we may have gone a little beyond that, but of course we shouldn't go too beyond.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I'm not going there. Allow me the indulgence for 2 minutes.
All
and
right.
the question will become much more clearer.
Okay, all right.
Now, one of the facts, the media at the time had reported that Mr. Themba Maseko had claimed that the president, Mr. Zuma, had requested him to assist the Gupta family. Those facts were known to the ANC by the time when it met with the Ogbay company.
Of the 8 people we say we met was Mr. Maseko. One of the 8 people we met was Mr. Maseko.
Yes.
Yes.
Now, against this background, and I think that's where Mr. Chair wants me to go to, against this background, and I'm putting this to you so that at least you are able to react to them. Against this background and against these publicly known facts at the time, was it not prudent for the ANC when it was approached by Ogbay, which was known at the time to have ties with the Gupta family, to say to them that, well, these issues pertaining to client and the banks, we as the ANC, we can't deal with them. Let them be dealt by the regulator, or let those issues be dealt with within the legal existing framework at the time.
The issue must understand about the ANC as a governing party and the obligation it is having. We deal with the good and the bad in society. We don't have the luxury of selecting that I can't talk to you, you are bad, you can talk to you, you are good. We talk to everybody, but we process things and take decisions. That is the nature of the animal.
As a matter of, or for the sake of completeness, did the ANC ever go back to Ogbay to say, well, we listened to you, you said what you said, we know what you wanted, but having listened to the banks and everybody, we can't assist or anything like that?
We went back to them telephonically after the NEC meeting. That's the only time we could do, and tell them, listen, yes, this job loss is a threat, but people must comply with regulations and rules.
Thank you.
Yes. Mr. Mantashe, lastly, I need to put the version of the banks as it was placed before this commission for you to be able to react and to see if you agree with what the banks had informed the chair in these proceedings. Now, if you may...
Sorry, Mr. Mkwena. I know that he has already dealt with the evidence of some of the bank's witnesses, maybe it's only one, who gave certain evidence with which he has difficulty. He has dealt with that. Is there other evidence that he hasn't dealt with which he has difficulty?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Oh,
I need
okay.
Mr. Mantashe to comment on certain aspects of the testimony that was adduced by the banks pertaining to their conduct, that it was lawful. And whether, I'm asking him these questions as the chairperson of the ruling or the governing party, and at the time he was the Secretary General of the governing or the ruling party. Whether when we make recommendations, one can be able to say that institutions such as the IMC that was formulated at that time, what was the perspective of the ruling party on those issues, the interministerial committee?
I'm sorry, I just mention the issues again. Which issues?
You'd recall, Chair, that parallel to the meetings of the ANC that were called between the ANC and the banks, there was also a cabinet decision in order to establish what Mr. Koran referred to as the task team, but I think that in the papers it's been referred to as the Inter-Ministerial Committee, which was established specifically to deal with the closing of the bank accounts by the banks at the time, the banking accounts and the termination of the relationship between Oak Bay and the banks. Now, the question is, what was the reaction of the ANC? I understand that Mr. Mantashe have dealt with this from the perspective of being the member of the ANC, but whether the banks in their approach, were they correct? That's what I wanted to test with him. But if you don't have to go there, you don't have to go there, Mr. Chair.
Well, I'm not sure that he is the right person to deal with that. Isn't that an issue between the banks and the Interministerial Committee?
But surely the ruling party would have a perspective about the issues that were publicly known at the time and whether or not was it a correct thing for such an intervention. But I'm in your hands, Mr. Chair.
Yeah. Well, if Mr. Mantashe feels that he wants to answer, he can answer. But, he said that, that's a state matter. He's here for the party, and it seems to me that unless he particularly wants to say something.
I can confirm that.
Yeah.
With my experience, I have a lot of experience in government now, 8 months. With that experience, I know clearly how cabinet takes decision without the party interfering.
Yeah.
I appreciate that better now.
Yes.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, that concludes the questions for Mr. Mantashe.
Okay. No, thank you. I'm very happy, Mr. Mantashe, that in your evidence you did indicate that the governing party, and I see that you also did refer to as the ruling party and the governing party. Minister Gwede, when I said ruling party, seemed not to like that. He preferred governing parties. I'm very happy that from what you have said in your evidence, it does appear that the ANC did look at the question of state capture in regard to not just the state, well, maybe it's not state capture, but in regard to how it was, how the state capture was happening. And it seemed, from what you say, it seemed that the ANC deliberated quite a lot on that, and you referred to a report, because you may already have heard that I have said that I do not think that the work of this commission could really be said to be complete without the governing party being able to say, we as the governing party who were given a mandate by the electorate looked at the events, and at a certain stage we started realizing that there was state capture happening, and this is what we began to do, and be able to say, maybe we fell short in certain respects, but this is what we did to try and deal with this issue as far as we could. So I think that's very important, and I think people in general in South Africa would, when they look at the issues of state capture, want to see how the governing party looked at the issue and what it did to try and deal with it. And from what you have said, it looks like when you come back, you may be able to tell us quite a lot about that. Yes.
Preferable, the last submission, which will be led by the president, he can get to those details, because it is the details that will get into serious disagreements even within the ANC on certain issues.
Yes.
One of the issues that divided us greatly was the demand for the president of the ANC to resign. Now, that issue, many people were outsiders, see us as a group of people who are just protecting this president of the ANC. What they don't see is like a duck. When a duck swims, you see nice bubbles around the neck. You don't see the paddling under the water. And I hope that the president will be able to talk to those paddles under the water.
No, that's fine. Of course, the current president of the ANC and president of the country was not president of the ANC for certain of the years that we may be looking at, and that would have to be covered. But obviously the ANC will see how it deals with that.
He was deputy president.
Yes. Thank you very much. Thank you for your evidence. You are excused for now. Thank you. Mr. Mkwena, is that have we reached the end of the day?
That is the evidence for the day, madam.
Yes.
Of the long day.
I didn't hear that.
That is the end of the long day, Mr. Chair.
And then tomorrow, who is coming tomorrow?
Chair, the two witnesses for tomorrow are Advocate Murphy and Mr. Ramatlodi.
Okay.
I'm not sure in that order, but those are the two.
Yes. We are going to adjourn now. Tomorrow we will hear the evidence of Advocate Murphy and Advocate Ramatlodi. We will resume at normal time tomorrow, 10 o'clock. We adjourn.
All right, well, there you have it. That's the end of the state capture inquiry taking place in Johannesburg for today. Of course, we've seen earlier this morning the former head of GCIS, Jimmy Manyi, wrapping up his testimony at the commission. Quite a dramatic one, Peter, in the morning when he was basically telling the chairperson